When I actually went back recently to read kind of classic work in the horror genre, there's nothing there almost for Black women. Either Black women are monstrous and in ways that are not great, not interesting, or they're just absent. So for me, I'm always aware that the way horror historically has been set up is really not it's not centered on some of the things that I want to talk about. So, but I think the good news is that there's so much change and there's so much interest in a rebalancing of that and a rethinking of that we're in a good
Hello,
place.
writers and crafters. I'm Valerie Isan,
And I'm Eric Mertz.
and this is episode 169 of the podcast, and it's October 30th, 2024, as we record this. Today, we have a guest on the show. Yay! It is Michele Tracy Berger, and we're going to be talking about speculative fiction. So I bet Eric and Michele are going to be just, and I'm going to be taking notes and just listening. First, we want to thank all of our existing patrons for believing in our work offline and here on the podcast. You can become a patron of the arts by going to patreon.com/Valerie Isan, IHSAN, for books, writing instruction, coaching, planning, all of the juicy bits. You can also go to patreon.com/Strange Air Stories for short stories in the paranormal mystery genre. As you, Eric, for those not watching on YouTube, it was perfectly timed. Like, who's the dude on your mug?
That's Ron Swanson from Parks and Rec.
Oh, yes. Okay.
My spirit animal.
You're
He is when I have visions, I go into Vision Quest. It's Ron Swanson that guides me, usually on the back of a turtle.
Oh my God. Is that a Terry Pratchett reference at all? Or
It became one. It
okay, I
went
was gonna
from
say,
Parks
wait
and
a
Rec
minute. It went
to
Discworld,
Discworld.
didn't
Yep.
it?
Yep.
Okay. Oh my God. All right, author updates, announcements. I am going to be teaching a class in Eugene, Oregon on Saturday, December 7th, all day long. It's my first all day long class. I'm super
Wow.
excited. It's called Unlocking the Heart of Your Memoir. So, we're going to be talking about memoir myths and finding the core message of your memoir and doing some really cool character exercises because it's sometimes it's really hard to write yourself as the character. You know yourself so well that you just assume other people know you too, and that doesn't come out in your writing. So we'll do a lot of exercises to pinpoint that. I am also starting a new video series on Patreon called Embody, all about living a more fit and intuitive life. So that is going to be starting next week. So if you want to join in that or find out more about that, you can go to patreon.com/Valerie Isan. And this particular series is going to be only for paid members. So for $5 is the lowest tier. So for $5 a month, you can join in on this. And the reason I wanted to do it kind of behind the paywall is because it is going to be a little more vulnerable and a little more, personal up close. So I don't know. I just didn't want that to be wildly public. So
Fair
that's,
enough.
yeah, that's that. What else am I doing update wise? Well,
You're
I'm gonna
teaching this
be
weekend.
going, yeah, I'm teaching this weekend in Gig Harbor, Washington. It's at a writing conference called Write in the Harbor. I went last year. It was such a sweet, tiny little, beautiful town. Have you been, Eric?
I've been to Tacoma. I've never been to the Gig Harbor,
Yeah.
what they call Gig
hmm
Harbor. So I'm excited for it.
Yeah, it's really beautiful. So yeah, I and it's the talk that I'm giving is from idea to outline planning a great book. And that was the master class that I taught in Alaska that was 3 hours long. And this time I have 60 minutes. So I'm gonna be like, I'm using the same slide deck and everything. I just don't know how I'm gonna squeeze it down.
We
But
talked about it last week. You just say, see me. If you need more about this,
yep.
see me after.
Yeah, see me
Then you
after.
get crowded at
Email
lunch. So,
me. And basically, I'm just not going to be doing any of the writing exercises in the class. I'll
right.
just be like, this is what you do. Do it at home. What's up with you? What's new in your world?
Well, as I was saying before we started, I just got back from Ghost Story weekend last weekend up in beautiful Rainbow, Oregon,
I
which
thought it was
was
Blue River.
well, it's everything has a Blue River address, but Blue River's off the highway. So like the sign when you get into the area where we were base camped was called Rainbow.
Okay.
Beautiful. I mean, I didn't know what to expect. I've been on the others. I've been the attendee side of those types of things before. Every writer's residence or retreat is a little different. So I had no idea, as the writer in residence, I had very little idea what I was getting into. Um, and it was like, and for having no expectations, it exceeded my expectations in every way. I had a blast. I was like fired up. I was at the end of the day just like worn out in the best possible way. There's a bunch of great stories. I started a whole new story. It was pretty fun. Yeah, I just came out of it very energized, and it was good. And yeah, I'll be at Gig Harbor with you in a few days teaching. Um, I'm teaching self-publishing fundamentals only like through the lens of here's all the ways that I botched covers, and here's all the way I screwed up interior design, and just kind of go through, step by step, acknowledging that self-publishing is hard, self-publishing is a challenge, and it's ever changing, but here are the fundamental things you need to know that,
Hmm.
these things matter. And I try to dispense some myths um as I go through. So that'll be fun. And then that's the end of the teaching year, I think. That's the end of like the gigging year. So kind of looking forward to that vibe too. Like
Yeah.
just kind of like getting ready for refreshed and renewed, like what are we doing in 2025?
That's
So
a myth, Eric. We were just talking about that before you came
I
on,
know.
Michelle. I mean, no way. I keep thinking, all right, after this, it'll be back to normal. Okay, after this, it'll be back to normal. And it occurred to me like, I don't know, 3 days ago, I'm like, oh no.
This is
What
normal.
if this is the normal? I don't know if I can handle this.
I think this is normal. Yeah. I'm gonna hold out hope. I'm gonna hold out hope that like I'm taking a day off after all this. I'm gonna take a day off in the week, Monday. I'm gonna
Uh-huh.
take it off, and we'll just see. Maybe that'll be the reset button I need. So
Yeah. Yeah. I'm gonna need some more self-care tools, I think, if this is the new normal.
yeah,
Yesterday, I skipped Spanish class and I read and I sat in the hot tub. I was just too exhausted. I just could not manage to go to another thing after a whole shift at the bookstore.
so Val, can you say in Spanish, yesterday I skipped Spanish?
I know that yesterday's ayer. No, I don't know what the verb skip to skip.
Skip.
I don't
Okay.
know that.
Okay. Okay. I would say if you could say it, then maybe you didn't need the class.
I
Like,
know I was talking to my coworker at the bookstore. I'm like, I don't want to go to Spanish today. And he said, well, can you come up with a reason not to in Spanish?
yeah. See, there you go.
So I
If
did.
you're
And he was like, there you go.
there, you go.
Like, that's
You're
not a good
fine.
enough reason. He's like, no, that's totally a good reason. If you're too exhausted to go, that's a reason, which was
Yeah.
something I really needed to hear. That's my tidbit. Let exhaustion be, yeah, its own
Okay.
excuse.
Yep. I think that's
Sometimes
perfectly.
that's a legit excuse. And
Yeah.
that's something that my yeah, blue collar work ethic upbringing has a
Yeah.
hard time like acknowledging.
Yep. Yep.
But sometimes you just gotta skip Spanish.
Yeah, there's this heroic feeling that I'm like grasping for of like I'm gonna plan the day off, but I'm not gonna take the day off. I'm actually gonna work. It's that like, I'm gonna work on my day off thing. I'm just ignoring it. That's my ancestors coming through, like the ghosts of like overworked people. I will ignore them.
You know how I get around that? My tip for that is I call them yes days. I don't say I'm taking a day off. I just say they're yes days. So I can say yes to myself, whatever I want to do right there in the moment. So maybe I do really want to work.
That's my
And if that's
parenting tool.
really the thing that's coming through, then sure, I'll do that. But
I do that with my
probably it's
kid.
going to be the
I
hot
need to
tub
do it with
and
me.
a mimosa. in
Yeah,
the
I need
middle
to
of
do
the
that with me
day.
instead of just a kid.
What's that?
I said I do that with my kid all the time. Like when I sense he's stressed out, I'm like, "All right, today's a yes day. What do you want? Let's go. Just skip school. Let's go do something." And I need to give me that. I need to have a
Mm-hmm.
yes day, a daddy yes day,
Daddy,
a
yes,
writer yes
day.
day, a
Writer,
writer
yes,
yes day.
day. What about you, Michelle? What's your update? What's going
Well,
on in your world?
I'm just so happy to be here. Thank you so much for having me. I am a person who believes in giving themselves permission. So everything you're talking about in terms of yes day and buffer days and knowing when we're really fatigued and knowing when we need to reset is I think super important. So yeah, that's something that I think we have to model for ourselves and for other people. And as a coach and as a creativity coach and an author, I think that kind of setting that structure is really important. So I've just loved listening into kind of the backstory here of what y'all have been up to. I'm actually about to go and teach. Haven't done a lot of in-person conferencing and teaching in a while, and I'm about to go to the North Carolina Writers Network Conference in Greensboro, North Carolina, teaching a workshop, an hour and a half on bending reality. And it's really about trying to encourage people who are interested in speculative fiction to learn about speculative fiction and to try techniques to bring that into their work. So I'm excited about that. But like you, Valerie, I taught that as a kind of as a master class before the pandemic, and I have an hour and a half. So I am thinking, like,
Mm.
what can I send them ahead of time to read that's short? And, what are some of the fun things we can do in class? And it's a large group. And so, yeah, anyway, thinking all about that, how to make that experience really anchored for people in terms of playing with speculative fiction.
Nice. I love talking with other people that do author services and speaking and writing. And, like we all three of us kind of do somewhat the same stuff. And it's really interesting to know, like, what would you, I'm going to pick your brain. I'm just going to deviate 1 second here because I need to
Sure,
Do
ask a
it.
question to both of
sure.
you. What, when you think keynote talk, what kind of topics could you? I know Eric's like, I'm gonna apply for, I want to start pitching that, adding that, because I've been speaking at conferences for a couple years now. So I want to add in pitching keynote topics. But I don't know, other than the inspirational, you can do it, that everyone seems to do. Like, what else is there in the Rolodex to talk about for keynote speeches?
I love that. I mean, I think I've done keynotes more related to my academic work, and I've
Hmm.
done a few kind of bigger talks related to kind of writing and the writer's journey. I think anything that encourages people, so there's inspiration, but also like kind of coming back to that fundamental question, which is an existential one. Why do we get up? Why is it worth getting up in the morning to do the work that we do? And giving people the broader vision. I think, especially at this moment in the US, people feel very divided, across a lot of different lines. So understanding that art and creativity has always been a pathway to understand oneself, to better connect with communities. So I think trying to anchor your vision of what you do, but sort
Mm-mm.
of thinking of it, how can you really bring people along for the journey who might be a bit more fatigued, a bit more jaded. So that's one area. And then, thinking, I really like Gay Hendricks' idea of the zone of genius. So he has a great book called The Big Leap. I
Hmm.
see people nodding their heads. Both of you does personal transformation. So Valerie, kind of going back to like, what is your zone of genius? What are the two or three things that you do so well that you enjoy, that's easy, right? And then kind of thinking, oh, this is what I could take these things that I always talk about, that I love talking about, and then creating a keynote. And I think it's really kind of going back to what are some of the core pieces that you do and just kind of elaborate, kind of broadening that out.
Cool.
I don't know if that's helpful, but
Totally is.
that's off
Yeah,
the
yeah,
top of
yeah.
my
I like the idea of, I think the hard part for anybody planning anything like that is just narrowing down. So the term zone of genius, I've never heard that before, but I'm gonna go dig in.
It's so helpful because he basically says he's written a lot of kind of personal development books. He's PhD. He was an academic for one time. But basically says most people operate like there's a zone of incompetence. Well, we don't want to operate like if we're not plumbers, we probably can't fix the toilet when it breaks. So we don't want to stay, we try not to stay in that. And then there's another zone which I'm blanking on, but then he talks about most people are sort of stay in their zone of excellence, which is where we do things very well and we get rewarded for doing things very well, and that's sort of the status quo, and that's great. But sometimes we don't then take the next level to really think about what are the one or two things that just light us up that we can do, not necessarily better than anyone else, but when we do it, we have that material satisfaction, personal satisfaction, emotional satisfaction. And he has a process for how to identify that and identify our fears around having more joy, more love, more success. And he talks about those as upper limit problems. So, and how we want to, as we move into the zone of genius, we also will see upper limit problems come out. And I just think it's funny. I read that probably 10 years ago and it just went it was really funny. It was just did not stick at all. It was like just went over my head. And I was in such a difficult place professionally that I just couldn't even connect to that. And then I reread it a couple years ago. I was like, this is amazing. Was able to implement things and made a lot of life changes. And so now I really I encourage when I coach people, I also encourage them to read a little bit about it. And he has a lot of YouTube interviews as well.
Cool. Well, what are you reading right now, Michele?
Oh my goodness. It's so funny when people ask me that, I always like forget to mention like all the things that I'm reading. I will say one of the things I will recommend, it's fiction. Nalo Hopkinson is an amazing speculative fiction writer. She's of Caribbean, Canadian ancestry. She's written a lot, like Brown Girl in the Ring, Midnight Robbers. She has a new short story collection called Jamaica, Ginger, and Other Concoctions. And if people like fantasy, climate fiction. She's just wonderful. I was really honored to be the San Francisco Public Library had us together. She was online and I was in person, and we were talking about our short story collections. But by far, that's one of the most interesting things fiction wise that I've read. Nonfiction, I'm listening to really just started How to Be Old, which is
Hmm.
that book that I guess a lot of people knew about, is by a former academic who then she retired and then became an Instagram sensation, just talking about her experiences with fashion. But the book is about like how to not limit ourselves as we get older.
What's the author?
I'm
Lynn
going to
Slayton,
put.
right? Lynn Slater.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you so much.
Lynn
I cheated.
Slayton.
I'm looking at the library website because I've now put like 4 books on hold because of you. I gotta say.
Thank you. My
So
work here is done.
yeah, yeah. Hats off to the
Go
Oregon City
forth and
Public
read.
Library.
That's right. Well, can I just say it's such a gift. I mean, I think as writers, writers and coaches, we're always reading, but particularly now, I am working on this short story collection, Doll Seed. When you're working on a big project, that takes quite a while, and you can kind of fall out of the rhythm of reading. And so I've been trying to catch up. There's so much new work out there, as you know, Erick in particular. Because Valerie, you do read some speculative fiction, but you're more.
I work in a bookstore, so I try to push my limits. So the latest speculative fiction I think I read was Mandrake Manor by J.P.
Oh yeah,
Rindfleisch,
oh yeah, yeah.
and the one before that I think was A Starling House.
Mm.
Alex Haro, I think, wrote that. I can't remember now.
there's just so much out there. So I've been trying to read new works that are coming out that I feel like my collection is in conversation with, but also I'm teaching a class on Afro-Futurism and the Black
Mm.
Imaginary. And
Ooh.
it is it I have amazing students. I have engineers in the class and English majors and sociology and everyone across different disciplines. But I it's not just about literature, it's about music and fashion. But I've been trying to read, broadly because there's a lot of stuff that's come out obviously in the last couple of years under the category of Afrofuturism, but then just kind of across and within that. So I feel like I've been trying to really be very very organized with my reading. And another thing that we need to do as authors and coaches is like finding the time to read and making sure we're doing that.
Yes. Sometimes
Yep.
you have to skip Spanish to do it, though.
Yes, perfect. I mean, I so wanted to chime in, but I was like, should I just chime in? There was like, oh my goodness, a hot tub. And I see your post. I was like, never, yeah, never not go into a hot tub, like a hot tub, especially now living in Cleveland. Hot tub, sauna, steam room, all
Anything
of
to get
those.
me warm. Yep.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely.
Cool. Well, Eric, what are you reading?
I am still reading because I brought a book up to a writer's retreat where I'm the writer in residence, and I said I'm just going to get some reading done,
Yeah.
which didn't happen. I'm still reading The Great When by Alan Moore,
Mm.
which part of the slow progress through that book is it is really dense, and he writes with some real style, and there's some like abrupt shifts in point of view in that story that are kind of take us into Alan Moore is great at like inventing language, which he did and he's done in a number of his books. And yeah, there's some invented language where you're reading it like,
Mm.
wait, what? Like there's people speak in these really like rough, nuanced ways. So yeah, I'm still working on that. I also picked up October Country by Ray Bradbury, which is a great obvious October book, which is a lot of fun. So I've been kind of picking it. That's the palate cleanser. And then I'm working on yeah, The Great When, a long London novel. I can't wait to see where it goes. So
I'm once again in that place where I'm reading way too many books at the same time and
Mm.
trying to like corral myself. I did start reading that Year of the Puppy only because I'm going to be taking Usha to the dog training class, even though she's not a puppy, but still interesting. And I like that author. Um, but in the hot tub, didn't want to read that. So I started an arc called Roland Rogers Isn't Dead Yet
Mm.
by Samantha Allen. It's about a ghostwriter that's writing a book for a ghost. And I was like, that's
Love it.
awesome. I'm
That's a great
totally reading
twist.
that.
like it, like it.
But I'm also in a book club that is reading books about money. And
Oh,
so I
yes.
also have A Happy Pocket Full of Money by David
Mm.
Cameron Gikandi, I think is how you say his name. So that is my most, those three are the ones that I'm going to be focusing on this month, anyways.
Love it. Love it. I love also the book club is not necessarily with writers. The money book club is just people reading about money.
Money, yeah.
Yeah.
Money
So
mindset and yeah, just wealthy woman sort of energy.
super, super important. Super important.
All
That
right. Anybody got any tidbits, resources, tips they want to share before we move on to the main topic?
I'm gonna say out of Ghost Story Weekend, there were some amazing, surprising stories. Like there were there were some stories that when people read them on Saturday night that I sat there and said, "How in the world did you come up with a ghost story about the vegetable crisper in a fridge belonging to a witch with one eye?" That is a true, that was really a story. It was hilarious. Um, so what part of this the exercise that they offered, that WordCrafters offered, was roll what they call roll-ups. Nina Kirky Hoffman does roll-ups, which you just kind of roll a dice and you off of a chart pick up a story element. Um, I'm just gonna say invite the random into your storytelling. Like sometimes that like roll of the dice, whatever way you can invite that random thing in, um, can shake something really unique loose. And again, I don't know who will publish those stories that came out this weekend, or if any of them will, but I don't know if that's the point. I think the exercise is more valuable than the outcome. So if you have yeah, I'd just say like find a way to randomly like invite random into your storytelling and see what it gets you. Because I saw it happen in some amazingly and creepy ways. There was one story that like kept me up that night because it was like, whoa. She's like, that's what the dice told me to do. So it can work
Which
in
is
all
kind of
ways.
creepy in and of itself. The dice
If you
told
can
me to
creep me
do
out
it.
to the point where I'm thinking about it when the lights go down, like then you did it. You did a good thing. So yeah, invite the random.
Love that.
I guess my tidbit, I think, has to do with you, Eric. Just being open to collaboration and finding ways to meet up in person with your collaborative partner, and it's really fun to like re-infuse those partnerships, with some energy. And yeah, we just talked about business, and it was pretty. We just sat at the bar and
The Booch
shared
and
a plate of
Beer
fries,
Summit,
and yeah, so
Yeah.
but it was, I think it's vital to be able to like meet up with your co-writer or your podcast co-host, or
Yep.
whoever you're collaborating with, just to like infuse it with a little bit of zhuzhing up, that sort of thing,
Yep.
if you can.
I agree. I
All
agree.
right.
And thank you for, and by the way, just sidebar, thank you for ordering the fries because I hadn't eaten by that time and I wouldn't have eaten for another like 4 hours. I would have been a wreck. So thanks to you. I made it to dinner. So
Eat
Fries to the
fries before
rescue.
dinner. That's my tidbit.
Great. Fries to the rescue.
yeah.
Yeah, when I was a young mother and my kids were in daycare, one of the best things this daycare did was provide a dinner snack. So
Mm.
at 5 o'clock, all of the kids got to eat this small little snack, which really helped prevent the meltdown by the time you get the kid in the car and you get home and you make what's for dinner, make dinner, all of that. you know, I melt down sometimes when
Yeah.
so having this small little dinner snack. So eat before dinner. That's my tidbit resource. All right. Well, let's get into the meat of today. Let's talk with Dr. Michele Tracy Berger. She is a professor, an award-winning writer, a creativity coach, and a pug lover. We all have dogs here, so. Her main love is writing speculative fiction, though she is also known to write poetry and creative nonfiction too. Welcome to the podcast, Dr. Michele.
Woo, 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 woo. I'm just so delighted to be here. And just for people who are listening or viewing, I mean, it's just such a delight because Valerie and I were in the same author online community and got to know each other a bit during the pandemic. So it's nice to be in your
Reconnecting.
world. Yeah,
Yeah.
and then getting to know Eric, who graciously went into the closet and wore pulled out a Cleveland hat. So
Yep.
like that's like the I feel like so special here. So I'm like I'm
Welcome.
Got to
vibing.
make you feel welcome.
Thank you.
Awesome. Well, you are here to talk with us about speculative fiction. So
Oh my goodness.
that is such a giant umbrella term, I think. Can you tell us give us your definition, I guess, of speculative fiction?
Well, I'll just play it really straight to the core, which is typically people talk about speculative fiction as work that has central to it ideas that are outside of what we know of the known physical universe. Now, we're always learning about the physical universe and things change, but this idea that the work is outside of what we know in terms of the physical laws of the universe and science. And so that is a broad definition. The term actually comes all the way out of the 19 late 40s, early 50s. And then feminist authors like Margaret Atwood started to use speculative fiction because her and others felt that mainstream definitions of science fiction were not um, broad enough to incorporate the work that she and others were doing. So it actually has kind of this multi-layered history. For me, the other piece of that is that it might make sense to think of it as genres. So people talk about science fiction, fantasy, horror. And of course, there are subgenres within those. And paranormal. So angels, ghosts, demons, right? So outside of what we think of as the known physical world is probably a helpful place to start.
All right.
Love it.
So talk to us about
Horror.
yeah.
It's that time of the
Which one do
year.
you
Uh,
normally write in? You kind of move around a little bit, right? So you just say speculative fiction so you can write fantasy,
well,
sci-fi, horror.
and this is where, it's interesting too, since Erick is also a speculative fiction writer. Um, I try not to get so hung up on labels and definitions. However, it's helpful for the reader because the reader is going to go to a horror novel, and like if I'm going to a horror novel or even horror media, I'm not looking for that necessarily happy ending ever after that someone who's doing, kind of romance, right? So it's also meeting reader expectations. But what's great about, sort of speculative fiction as an umbrella term is that it allows for a lot of playfulness, I think. And for example, I will often say Toni Morrison's Beloved is really a ghost story. It's just
Yep.
told at a level, it's so elevated that
Right.
it kind of seems to transcend genre. But when you get down to it, it's a basic ghost story, right? So speculative fiction and kind of quote unquote literary work cross paths and meet at the intersection. So I think, it's important for people to realize that it's really an umbrella term, and there's a lot of things that fall under that. And horror is really a feeling, right? In many ways,
Right.
it is a genre, but really, when you think about horror, it encapsulates a set of feelings. And so we were talking right before um, we sort of officially started that right now the term elevated horror and social horror are in this kind of currency, and that comes out of from the kind of film landscape, moving away from, people have this, I think, very limited idea of what horror is to begin with. They think if they saw something in the 1980s or they saw a slasher film,
Right.
they think it's all blood and gore.
It's
And
the shelf of
really,
the video store.
correct. And the horror as a sort of genre has so many nuances, right? But this idea of elevated horror, people have been using to talk more about films that have come out, like Midsummer, The Witch, that
Right.
have,
Horror. Yep.
right, Hereditary, that have great cinematography. And they really harken back to actually the 1960s and 70s art house
Yep.
films.
Yep.
So, but then social horror is people are using that term to really think about how creators, particularly creators of color and creators from art underrepresented communities, are looking at what does it mean. So, for example, for me, what does it mean to be a racialized other in the US, and kind of producing creative work that looks at that, right? And that has that as it's not about the monsters in the basement, it's about the systems of power and how they impact people. And so Tanana Reeves' The Reformatory, which has gotten a lot of attention, looking at kind of how in the 1950s in Florida, how young Black men were kind of taken up into the juvenile justice system and, kind of suffered very greatly. So that's sort of based on some historical work. But so I think I like to think about really um, how can I talk about ordinary people in extraordinary circumstances? And that goes across my work. And
Mhm.
so, some of it's very speculative, some of it's kind of psychological horror. But I like that horror is having and I don't know if Eric, if you would agree that horror is having this kind of renaissance moment again, like people are rediscovering it.
Grady
Um,
Hendricks, I think, is a way for other people to get
yes,
into horror a little bit because
yes,
I get scared easy, so I don't like that horror feeling
Right.
myself. But I
But
have
I
been
think there's
able to get kind of back into, across genre by reading something
right.
um, a little more approachable, I guess. Or like you were talking about the films, Midsummer, The Witch. Like
mhm.
I've seen those, and that kind of horror, I think I can stomach.
Yeah, or even like Wednesday, which was a phenomenal success, right? Which is
Yeah.
like, um, kind of, a magical school to some degree with elements of horror, right? So I think but I think in film and in the literature landscape, there, there's horror comedy, there's satire, so there's a kind of a that has been able to attract people. I see. Yeah, Eric, you're nodding. So
Yeah, I feel like if you think about the 50s with and the 60s with Twilight Zone, which was like a broad spectrum of speculative fiction, because there's every one of those, none of those stories were firmly camped within one. Well, that's not true. Most of those, the best stories and memorable stories were some blend of genre. And I think that there's
yes.
been this pendulum swing from, the 60s and 70s with art house, Wicker Man or those kind of things that and the anthology series, which gave a broad definition to horror. Then through the 80s, it kind of got this bad name, like it's all, you know, lumbering villains and sleepaway camps. But I think, yeah, I think we're definitely back to this place where it's about a feeling and not a box cover. And it's, your version of scared might be Midsummer or them or, like whatever that is. Yeah, you can get whatever you need. And I do love the little crossovers. I mean, I like when horror elements find their ways into other things because you're right. It is a genre just like defined by a feeling.
Well, you talked about meeting reader expectations. That's a challenge for all writers, but for you particularly, you were talking about being a creative of color. What challenges do you face writing in this genre?
Mm.
Well, I thank you for that question. I am at a different point in my career. I think the gatekeepers have changed to be quite honest. And I'll give you an example. So I wrote a story. So the title story of the collection is called Doll Seed. It's 15 stories from flash to novella length stories across different sort of genres in speculative fiction. And Doll Seed is about what happens, how can we imagine the inner life of the dolls that were part of what was called the doll test that led to the 1954 Brown versus Board of Education, the dismantling of legal segregation. And so basically, if just people remember that part of what the argument was that racism was harmful, particularly to Black children, is because they showed Kenneth Clark and Mamie Clark, two African American psychologists, were doing psychological research where they showed Black and white kids, Black and white dolls. And Black and white kids often preferred or thought the white doll looked better, was cleaner, so on and so forth. So I try to just imagine, okay, what happened? One, what happened to those dolls? What was what was the inner life of those dolls, right? And so the story itself, basically, this sort of spirit from somewhere else lands in the body of a brown doll in 1952, and you follow that journey, Shavella. You follow her through this whole kind of evolution, and you see their hierarchies with toys and dolls. Anyway, writing the story, totally believe in the story like any writer, as I was pitching it, submitting it, the story got better over time. But I was getting all of these rejections, and literally for like, I'm not even joking, like for a decade, right? Getting these rejections or coming really close. And um, it's interesting that in the last decade or so, there's been a lot more changeover of what people think of as interesting work, right? So I'm not saying as a writer the story just should have gotten published without any revision. However, the degree to which people didn't know the African American literary tradition or don't know the African American literary tradition. So if you're writing that through speculative fiction and the editors don't really know that or understand that, or any, literary tradition outside of speculative fiction, they may not appreciate the work. Anyway, make a long story short, the story I submitted to FIA, the magazine of Black speculative fiction, in maybe I think 2018. They took it with very little revisions, and then later on it won a major award. And I don't think that, again, not just the precision of the writing over time. I do think there's just been a change and broader interest in publishing of looking at stories that are thinking about not only otherness, but thinking about that in the constructs of the US. And so there's more space. And, publishing, I think, both traditional publishing, now indie publishing, people have been able to be a lot more inventive because they, have more control over what's out there. But I think the also the audience, the public is ready for more complex stories. And I guess the last thing I'll say about that is when I went back and started reading traditional horror. Like I grew up on horror media. I'm a child of the late 70s, and like most Gen Xers saw things that were really inappropriate and for my generation, but loved it. But when I actually went back recently to read kind of classic work in the horror genre, there's nothing there almost for Black women. Either Black women are monstrous and in ways that are not great, not interesting, or they're just absent. So for me, I'm always aware that the way horror historically has been set up is really not it's not centered on some of the things that I want to talk about. So, but I think the good news is that there's so much change and there's so much interest in a rebalancing of that and a rethinking of that we're in a good place. So that was a long and somewhat detailed answer to your question, which is complex.
I was trying to
Yeah, I
take
just
notes, but I think I will just not put the notes in and use this
stew
as
on
the
it.
teaser. Yeah, this is great.
Oh, thank
I think
you.
it's interesting. I think it's, yeah, what you're saying like really sparked something for me. I think a lot of that in my very anecdotal, informal processing is like, I think self-publishing has created such an open forum for whatever creators want to create, and readers now understand that they can, if they want to, and I'm going to go back to that example from this weekend. Like if you want a story about a haunted um, vegetable crisper in a refrigerator, there's probably a story out there for you. And I think that then the markets then respond to that and realize like, wow, reader interest is much broader than, you know,
Slasher
the
films.
the yeah, it's much broader than they believed it was. And so I think there's this nice feedback that comes from um, just the audience is being seen because people are well, because there's a market for it. So
Absolutely. And I think breaking some of those horror tropes and now we can laugh at them. Like we don't see as many films or stories that has the Black person or person of color die at the beginning, right? Like that was such a trope that,
yeah,
Mm.
horror no longer uses that. Or the damsel, like, when we were talking about the slasher films, this sort of damsel in distress, right? Who's always tripping over something. It's like, woman, why are you running in high heels in
right,
those
right,
1970 films? So I think there's just such an appetite and an expansion of complex characters that better reflect our society. And yeah, indie publishing, I think is has been so important in leading the way in that. And then finding readers who then, as you said, kind of, or like, we want more of this. Give us, we want more of what you have. And
right.
traditional publishing, I think, is beginning to catch up.
I have to do a hat tip to, I have a friend who does a horror podcast. They do horror movie series. It's called This May Hurt a Bit. And one of the things my friend Jim, who's one of the hosts, says is about that, the final girl, trope, the girl who survives the story. Like she used to stumble her way. I like the idea of high heels, she's running and barely making it out. But she used to survive by luck. Now she survives by guile, you know? And I think we owe some of that to Sigourney Weaver and Aliens. I think we owe some of that to, what came after. But I think now she survives in a different way. I think that's a huge change in how we see um,
Women.
that character.
Yes,
Yeah. And women. Yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. It's like, someone was, I think Reese Witherspoon, I saw a clip of this and she was talking about more like contemporary movies, but she said, I really started to, I think she said something like, I started to write my own or produce my own work when I saw films where they're in a jam, a man and a woman are in a jam, and the woman turns to say, what do we do now? And she was like, all the capable, competent women I know are not going to necessarily turn to their male partners what do we do now? It's like, so that sense of that, I think, a fullness around race, class, and gender, and also that there might not be only one final girl. We might actually get more than one
Right.
person living in, but yes,
Right.
but that whole rethinking of um, not just surviving because of accident, but surviving because we've sort of solved some of the challenges in the story.
Right.
Because we're smart
And
and
as writers,
powerful.
as writers, that also is freeing as well. Like to recognize the truth. We talked about that all weekend long. Like there's
Mm,
expectations and then there's subverted expectations. There's, the tropes have meaning and power, and that's why we go back to them. But there's also a lot of power in twisting, you know, what that trope might mean in tradition. It's a power as a writer to take control of that story rather than just simply fall into the pattern that was been laid out for you.
absolutely.
Laid out for you by a
Yes.
lot of authors who probably didn't get out of their own communities or who didn't understand other people or how things work, people that didn't look or act like them. So,
Should we talk about marketing at all?
Mm.
oh, you bring up the M word and then like I just
I'm just gonna
oh,
drop that pile of right there.
it is a great question. I mean, how much, yeah, like yeah, word marketing fits in this whole thing.
Well, it is a really good question. So I am so honored to be published by Aunt Loot Books. Aunt Loot Books has been around for 40 years. They are a feminist press. Their mission is really around supporting and serving underrepresented writers. And I had known them as an academic because they had published really critical feminist theoretical text, cultural text. But so I pitched them. They've just started really redoing their fiction line. And I've had nothing but great experience working with small press. But I also have been reminded of, and you both know this, that obviously marketing is not a one-time thing, and it is about I think it's about being authentic and consistent. And I've learned a lot in this process. I haven't been on a book tour or done that kind of work in a while. My major publication prior to Doll Seed was a novella called Renew You, which is about what if a trip to the beauty salon could kill you? What if an everyday hair care product what transmitted a virus? And so, but I was with a micro
Now that's
press.
some horror there.
Yeah,
Yeah. Come
I'm gonna
on. There's
go
got to be
to
some
yes,
safe
the
place.
yes.
get a
When you're in the
blowout
barber's chair,
later.
that's got to be safe space. Come on.
I know I tell people like men, women across race and ethnicity, everyone does something in their hair, and everyone should
Yeah.
be concerned about what they're doing there. But I was with a micro press, and they were wonderful, but they did mostly online work. So blog at the time, this is like 2017, so blogs and other things. And now it's a whole different landscape, obviously. So I would learn how to do an Instagram live, which so I think in terms of being an author, and again, this is where hybrid and indie writers have been kind of setting the stage and doing amazing creative work. I think a lot of traditional published authors have to really embrace the work of marketing. And I don't know if you've seen the Netflix special about Jackie Collins, a writer of the 80s and 90s. Highly recommended. I can't remember the name of it, but it's about Jackie Collins, who was a phenomenal writer. And you see, so even though like writers might complain, and I wonder if you hear this, Valerie, some of the clients that you work with, oh, like I have to do marketing, I have to do publicity, And it's like when you look, Jackie Collins was writing, sitting down to write hundreds and hundreds of fan letters every single week by like writing it out by hand back in the day. And like you look at someone like her, we writers have always had to think about how they get how people find them. Um, and I just think we now it's much more explicit, and in many ways we have opportunities to choose how do we do that? Do we do that, you know, focus on Pinterest? We do that focus on Instagram? Do we do that in a variety of places? But I just think it's part of what we do, and I think it can be
Yep.
really creative.
There's a great documentary about Harlan Ellison, the old sci-fi
Yeah.
fantasy horror author, and it opens with him writing a fan a letter, and he's on the phone with the publisher, and you can hear the publisher says, "We have someone that can do that for you." And he said, "Yeah, that's me."
Oh my goodness, I love
They
it. I
wrote the
want to see
letter
it.
to me, and I'm going to write them back. And it was just so, I mean, he was a cranky sort, and it was kind of
That's
played
right,
for a
right.
laugh there. But that sincerity of like connecting to readers is like
Absolutely. Yeah.
priceless. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I will watch that. I have not seen that.
Yeah. Yeah. I just, yeah. So talk about like where, yeah, just the, I guess, craft and marketing intersection for you. Like, are you, when you write a story, this is a big discussion. I hate to keep bringing up this weekend,
Mm.
but I feel like I'm having a sort of a more focused conversation
You're
with you that,
processing what
yeah,
happened through the
Love
lens
it.
of this conversation.
yeah. So when you're writing a story, just any story, where does the marketing of it come into your head? Do you think, hey, I've never read anything like this. This is a great idea. Or is it more like, hey, what if this, trip to the salon could kill you? Is it more like you're going to follow the idea or a place, it fits a place where you think you have a reader?
I write, I'm one of those writers that I have to have a character, first of all. I don't usually start with a conflict. I don't usually start with setting. I have to have a character. Once the character, I have a sense of the character, then I'm able to construct pretty much the story and follow that character through. Um, I think about those questions in the submission process. And, so most of the stories in Doll Seat were published. Some of them are new, but they were published over the last several years. So in terms of the submission process, that's where I'm doing the research and thinking about, does this literary journal take speculative work? Am I going to primarily a speculative genre? Am I doing a more sort of specialized within the genre? For the book, I think one of the interesting and fun things that Aunt Loot did, they did a mood board, and we got to talk about what is that intersection of particularly Black readers who are interested in speculative fiction. What is that intersection of their list of people who don't necessarily like horror, but they are interested in like empowered female characters, which there are a lot of mine in the book. And as well as the intersection of people who are literary but will read certain things. And so so from that standpoint of how is this book going to land, we thought a lot about how to target and think about. So in some of my how to think about the ideal community of readers. Um, in writing the copy, some of the copy for the book is like if you like Octavia Butler, Kelly Link, and Dean Koontz, you might like this work. And that was
I
that
like
was
all
me.
those people.
Well, thank you. And
Am I
I
your
mean,
reader?
I think so. I think so, Eric. I mean, I feel like there's something in here, in terms of the themes of like sacrifice and betrayal, excuse me, yeah, sacrifice and freedom, trust and betrayal. I have stories in there about fathers and sons, as well as a lot of stories about sisters and mothers and daughters. So there's something in there for everyone. But yeah, so trying to anchor, and I love Kelly Link's work. She is not only an amazing short story writer and craft person from the literary angle. I mean, she knows how to tell a story, and she cares about the words on the page. So for me, I care about the words on the page quite a bit, and so it has that a little bit of that literary feel in the collection. And so and Octavia Butler. I mean, I haven't met yet a person who hasn't liked Octavia Butler.
I
Maybe
don't
they're
know
out
those
there, but
people.
usually, they usually will. They may not have read all of her work, but they're like, oh yeah, I can get with that. A little Mind of My Mind, or Wild
Yeah.
Seed or whatever. So, but so I think for writers, it is trying to do some of that imaginative work of like, yeah, who's your ideal reader? What kinds of things are reading? And then trying to align in the marketing or the copy that will catch their eye.
When you
On the
do, oh,
I
go
was
ahead.
just going to say on the Octavia Butler note, somebody I'd never read her, and somebody just this was years ago, and somebody handed me Parable of the Sower, and they were like, it was at a conference. They just said, "I'm done reading this," and they handed me this book. I wasn't asking for it. We weren't even talking, and they just said, "Here, take this. I'm done reading this. Somebody else has to." And I said, "Okay," and I took it, and yeah, what a gift. Yeah,
And we live in 2024 where now Parable of Solar is set in the year 2024, which is really interesting.
oh
Oh,
yeah, yeah.
Very interesting. But yeah, she's, fledgling for vampire stories, her Xenogenesis series, just an amazing writer. And if I can bring up from a coaching standpoint, something that I love to talk about with Octavia Butler, there's a lot of work. I think her papers are in the Huntington Library, and they saw in her journals that she used affirmations. And I'm a
mm,
big believer of they found like years and years and years worth of her journals where she was writing affirmations before she was published. And I'm a big believer in neutral to positive self-talk for creators because no one I know usually no creator I know gets up in the beginning of the day and is like, I'm amazing. Of course so and so is gonna want my work. Like, I'm gonna sell
Right.
100,000 copies on Amazon. Like most of us need to have more positive or neutral statements about on the days that things aren't going well. And I like to think of affirmations as some people call it a pattern interrupter, right? It just kind of
mhm.
allows you to get back on track for what you're doing. But anyway, it's if you don't know that side of Octavia Butler, it's there's a
Hmm.
lot of work out there now about her work, about those affirmations.
Interesting.
Well, since you brought up coaching, I did want to ask you about the author services that you provide, because I know that that's part of your creative world as well, and how it fits into your creative world and what services you do offer.
I have been coaching, been very fortunate to coach for the last 15 years, and my coaching practice has changed some. It's called the Creative Tickle, and the motto is "Tickle Your Genius Awake," which I have worked with creators who really struggle with procrastination, perfectionism, and loud inner critics. And now
Mm,
I tend to specialize with writers, emerging writers, interested in mindset work and who are open to both kind of neuroscience and what I like to call, deep wisdom traditions that are not necessarily based in science. So, spiritual, interconnected. So I have a big toolbox and I like to play with clients in terms of serving them. But my brand is, fun and accessible and inspirational. And I love that work and I have some online classes and yeah. So I don't do as much one-on-one coaching anymore, but do more group coaching where possible.
and is that for scalable reasons or just your interest or lack of time for the one-on-one? Because I was sitting here thinking, ooh, maybe.
Well, for you, Valerie, for you, we can do some good peer trade and support each other.
Nice. I dig trades.
I know you do because I follow you on your off Facebook page. Uh, some of it is time, and some of it is, for a long, long time, I did deep one-on-one work with people, and I love that work. I find that the energy I get now is really kind of supporting a cohort of people,
Mm,
and particularly around, I used to do much more broad coaching, and now I really like doing it around a specific issue, and particularly around submission. So I do a lot of work around
mm,
helping writers, and even indie writers who are successful at some point in their career. It's helpful for them to know some of the traditional forms of publishing because they might get asked to submit a story or they might want to pitch an anthology. So the work that I do around submission, I have an online course called Charting Your Path to Publication, which deals with the mindset around submitting your work and dealing with rejection.
mm.
Yeah.
Awesome. That would be super useful. I'll put a link in the show notes to
Yes.
your class, online class page off of your website. So, well,
Thank you.
do you have anything else that you want to say, plug? Ha-
This has been such an amazing conversation. I feel really honored because we were talking I don't get a chance to talk at multiple levels. So like in my Instagram, I think the description is something like I like to inspire and scare, but not at the same time. So, so I feel like I really have appreciated being able to talk about how do we support writers. I personally, I will say that I for a long time didn't have literary community, felt like I wasn't making
Mm.
progress, and really felt like I was in the metaphorical basement. And the
Mm,
things that pulled me out of that were literary community and working on self-worth. And so one of my personal missions is to make sure other writers don't suffer and that we have more joy on the path. And my sense,
mm.
even though I just met you, Erick, I feel like we want to have more joy on the path, right? And
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's what's really powerful.
I
Nice.
appreciate you saying that and seeing that because that is something that I don't coach. I definitely ghostwrite and consult with people, and I think it's just really like it's really hard to see the joy in this unless and it's like a muscle you have to learn as a creative person is to see the joy in the
Yes.
process. And so I'm
Yes.
always pumping people up for for that feeling of like, yeah, go find the joy there.
Yes. Thank
And
you.
I'm going to say that while we were talking, I went to the Oregon City Library website. Hats off to the Oregon City Library. We have no ant loot books in our catalog. So the Oregon City Library has a program that you can request book titles and you can request that they start purchasing and considering books from publishers. So I'm going to fill that out today. I'm
Mm.
going to the
Oh
library
my
today. So
goodness.
we will be carrying books
Thank
from your
you.
publisher and you at the Oregon City
Oh,
Library in 2025 because
oh my
Yay.
goodness.
I want to read these and I want everybody to read these. So
Oh my goodness. Thank you so much. I'm really touched. Thank you.
That's awesome. What a lovely way to end the episode. Yay.
Hey.
Find the joy on the path. All right. That's all we have time for today. It was such a pleasure talking with you, and I hope
absolutely.
that you will come back again sometime and talk to us more about your work.
Oh my goodness.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Thank you. My next project, working on writing a nonfiction book. So would
Oh,
Hmm.
love to do that down
You
the
saw
line.
us both perk up at
I
that.
know. I like nonfiction.
Oh,
What is it about?
I
Is
know.
it for writers or?
For writers, yes, indeed.
Ooh. Ooh,
but I love
ooh, ooh.
anyone who pivots. So like I think that would be an interesting conversation about, being in those different spaces and, going from one to the other and how and why.
All right. Well, there's our next
There's
podcast
a
interview
teaser for
with
the next one.
Michele.
Yeah.
Pivoting from fiction to nonfiction. All right. That's all we have time for now.
Thank you so
See
much.
you later. See you
Bye-bye.
next time. Bye bye.
Bye-bye. All
So,
right.
Erick, well, what do you write? Or what?
Professional ghostwriter. Um,
Ah,
I do I a lot of screenwriting
ooh.
or I have some producer clients that I've worked for a while. I write screenplays. I also write memoir for whomever. Um,
Mm.
and then what I write for me is speculative fiction, small town ghostly mysteries, um,
Yay.
sort of what do we call Melville, amateur sleuth, sheriff
Melville's not an
becoming
am.
paranormal
Oh,
investigator.
okay. I was gonna say he's not amateur. He's a professional, but the sleuthing part, yeah, I suppose so.
Yeah, yeah. So my main character is a
Love it.
sheriff who's the sheriff of the small town he grew up in. And as he takes the badge, discovers that there's his hometown is haunted, and so he kind of has to explore his own past as well as like stop a cult as it starts to like enact a long standing or a long dormant ritual.
Mm.
Um, wow, I should. Are we recording this? I need that little bit of copy right there.